Hello, Scott Montgomery of the Small Town Mercer. Today I'm going to talk about, I think, a very interesting topic, and I think one that needs to be addressed. Let me get that. Let me get myself more in the picture. There we go. Okay, and I want to talk about transitions of technology. And I'm going to go back to the 15th century and work my way up, and I want to show you something that's that I think that's pertinent to um, the technology of today. And there's a couple things that I want you to know. Number one is that technology changes human dynamic. All right? And I'll explain that in a minute. Okay, the second thing I want you to know is that technology, depending on the type, always has a relapse and I would say a springboard. All right. And what this means is that when you generally see a new technology come up, there's going to be a lot of resistance to it. And because it doesn't necessarily work with what everybody's used to. And so you're going to have that pushback. And the best way I can describe this is um, let's say you're in say you're in the stock market or something, and you're looking at a stock and you're looking at, the trends. So, you know, a company goes up and then it goes down, or a stock goes up and then it goes down, then it goes up and then it goes down, and then occasionally it'll shoot to the moon. And we're talking about the latest technology and what have you, or the latest, greatest company on the stock market or something like that. So they have this upward trend. And I guess the best way to describe that in the cryptocurrency world, look at where Bitcoin has been the last 3 or 4 months. And you kind of see that climb. Okay, and that's what I'm talking about, relapse and springboard. And um, technological transitions, the reason I said I'm going back to the 15th century is that you're going to have some examples of technology and how it's going to change the dynamics. Okay? Now, think about in world history. Okay? So, world history, what type of civilizations did we have? Well, the most successful civilizations early on were these empires, right? And generally, when you study world history, we start off with Egypt and Mesopotamia, and then you get to the Babylonian Persian Empire, and then you could see this, throughout the Bible. You can look at how Israel developed and their role in world history, and what else? So, you have a lot of Hittite empires, Philistines, the smaller empires, I would say. And then you see the emergence of like India and China as well in the ancient world. Then you have the invaders, the Mongols or the Hungarians. And so for a lengthy period of time, you have these empires, and they're ruled by kings, and they have large armies, and the people generally grow food and produce some sort of building, rudimentary type, although the Egyptians were pretty modern. And that's pretty much what you have. You have construction projects, and you have weapons, you have some medicine, and the acquisition of trade and wealth. And that's generally how it worked in these ancient empires. And then what you had were conquering empires. And conquering empires were a little bit unique because the conquering empires, such as Greece, I said the Huns, you know, although they were unsustainable, and especially the Romans, right? And these civilizations were a little different. Actually, let me leave this open. Whereas you have the other world empires, largely militaristic. They had a ruler, a king, some type of ruler. You know, the citizens were generally, essentially, serfs or slaves or pawns or whatever you want to call them. But when we get to Rome and Greece, that looks a little different, doesn't it? Then we have this experiment. We start to experiment with a republic or a type of democracy. And what do you see? You see now the citizens are now more involved. Citizens can actually raise themselves to higher ranks in society now. And so this was a huge technological change here. All right? Now what happened is, and focusing on Greece and Rome, you had great literature, great art. Exercise became important, right? You know, mostly for military training, but then it evolved into athletic endeavors and athletic events and that type of thing. Not that other societies didn't have that too, but not to the degree these societies would. And you start to see engineering, technological advances in medicine, so forth and so on. And these empires grew and grew and grew and became very large, encompassing other empires even. And so you see, and they spread their technology and literacy as well. Writing and reading and what have you become important. You know, even science exploration, right? So mapping and all these things take place, okay? So what happens is these large empires became extinct, right? Then you had a period of dark ages. And in the dark ages, you see a lot of smaller kingdoms, you know, the what the Romans used to call the barbarians, right? All these small kingdoms. And they would run generally like you would read in a storybook, right? You have a king, you have his knights, and then you have some lords who are in charge of all these knights and they're loyal to the king, you know, in his particular territory. And then you have sort of the middle ground people. There were landowners that reported to the lords, but they had their own separate categories. Sometimes they would hire people, you know, the serfs, but in the lowest level you have serfs, right? Or vassals, or, well, actually these are the vassals, the landowners. The serfs are just people that work on the land, they live on the land, and they're stuck there forever. And this is the vast majority of the people, right? They're probably 50, 60, 70% of the people in the kingdom. And what do you see happening during that period of time? You see a lot of wars, very little technical innovation, very high instability because kingdoms are at war with each other all the time. So you're going to see certain territories, the map changes. You know, you look every 100 years and you've got different kingdoms that are in charge. the most successful one being the Kingdom of the Franks. And generally, poor hygiene, poor medical practices. Remember, you just as an example, in Rome, did they not take baths? Did they not have their own version of air conditioning? Did they not have their own ways of, having a great deal of support as far as living? Most people lived in nice housing and well-structured housing, and they had voting rights and all those things. Okay, fast forward, 500 to 1,000 years later, the serfs don't have any of that. They're living in some hut that barely can keep out the rain or the rats or any of that stuff, right? It's the people on top that are living well and having most of the economic benefits, okay? And as you see, very little it changes over, from 100 years to 100, from the year, I don't know, 500, let's say, to the year 1100 or 1200, very little innovation taking place. Very, very little. So we get to, let's say, the 15th century, the 1400s, and you're going to see things that are going to change now. And I picked that starting point, not that there weren't innovations before that, but this is going to be what I call the perfect storm of technology. Okay? So, first of all, this is right before the Enlightenment starts. So what you're going to see is priests, Catholic Church, which is the Christian movement at that time, are going to start to read, and they're going to start to educate the population. And why is that? Well, it's because the church is now spread all over the continent of Europe. And large parts of Europe are hard to get to. And so having to educate priests is now critical. You don't have certain city-states anymore, that just a handful of them, where a bishop can pretty much run everything, and or large kingdoms where the bishop tells people that how to think or whatever. You've had what I call the perfect storm is you've had a lot of upheaval and you have a lot of strife going on when we get to the 15th century. And what do I mean by that? Well, in the Holy Land, for example, remember the Holy Wars, the Crusades, which are usually won by the European Christian armies. Well, that's not going to happen anymore. The Byzantine Empire is going to get defeated by the Ottomans. So the Ottoman Empire, I would say one of the last great empires, this is now going to be at their height, and they're going to defeat and actually conquer parts of Southern Europe now. Okay? What's going on in Europe? Let me flip the page here. There's a lot going on, but I'm going to focus on only a few things. Okay? So, in the ancient world, what do we have? Or, I'm sorry, in the 15th century, what do we have? What are some of the events besides this? So, the defeat of the Holy Land armies. Okay? That's nominal. As we move along into the century, like I said, priests are going to be expanding because there's been a lot of upheaval in Europe. So, for instance, in Germany, you've got a lot of kingdoms. There's about 300 of them, and they're fighting with one another. And every year they have a different king because they can't decide on how or what things should be run. So different kings have different ideas, and they rise up enough support, and they overthrow the other king. So you got a lot of that. You've got a lot of smaller kingdoms starting up. Okay? Just an example, the French are going to start to unite. England has been in their country for about 100 years now. And now the French are going to start to unite. And they're going to finally defeat the English in the 100 Years' War. So France is emerging now. England is going to go the other way. They're going to have one of their civil wars, and we know it as the War of the Roses, right? So War of the Roses. So you've got, and remember, we're all still the Catholic Church at this point. It's all of Christianity. You know, you've got the Italian states in strife, in war. And then the printing press comes out. All right? And that's your technological advance. So you got the printing press, mostly printing what? The Bible. And so now people are studying the Bible. People are studying earlier manuscripts. Priests are reading. They're now starting to teach monks and other people who want to join the church to read. And now you start to expand literacy for the first time. And now you have people developing ideas and philosophies and maybe questioning some of the practices of the church, comparing the Bible to what the church was doing at this time. And what was the church doing at this time? Well, we had a civil war in the church. And we had as much as 4 popes at one time. And then you have people such as John Wycliffe and Jan Hus. I'll write that down. I'm running out of room here. Wycliffe and Hus, right? And they're starting to question certain practices of the church, like indulgences. And eventually that's going to be a civil war, and certain popes are going to take their side, and certain popes are not. Eventually, certain popes that take their side are going to be considered heretics and anti-popes and relieved of their duties, I guess, somehow, some way. And these people, especially Hus, are going to be executed. And so now the people are finally going to realize that there's the pushback. The people, these rulers, the traditional rulers who had been in power for centuries, are going to push back. And they're going to start wars, and you see all these wars. But unfortunately, all these wars, what they're going to end up doing is they're going to show people who are now getting more educated that there must be a better form of government. Right? Right? So now you're going to start to see philosophy and science flourish. All right? And you're going to see, in particular, what I want to mention is you're going to see a renewal. And it's not going to happen right away in the 15th century. It's going to happen after that. But you're going to see a renewal in what? Government. And we're going to look back at Rome and Greece. And what did these nations champion? They championed some sort of a republic, a democracy of some sort. All right, so now we're going to look into that. And that's going to be your technological change here. We're going to look at this type of government. And so this is what you see all, and I'm going to introduce this right here and right now. I'm going to introduce this, and this is called what I call a collective look. So we had a collective look. Oh boy. Collective look at society, right? Or an individualistic look. All right, at society. Collective look at society, individual look at society. And what do I mean? So you go from empires, great rulers and their great militaries, and the people, whoever, if you want to eat, you fight for this guy. If you don't want to be a slave, and you want some sort of decent treatment, You try to fight for the winning army. If you don't fight, if you lose, and you get killed or enslaved. And that's how things worked. So that's a more collective form of government. And then we get to Rome and Greece, and you have a more individualistic look at government. Not completely, but somewhat. Okay? And then you get into the fall of Rome and the Dark Ages where things didn't really change much. You had a bunch of kings and knights and things like that, and it was kind of a stagnant lifestyle, not much technology, not much growth, not much ingenuity, and the people were largely semi-slaved, enslaved, I should say. So then you go back to the collective, right? And taxes from the middle ground people are collected. And then you go back into individualistic, and but then you get into this mercantilist system. And so we're going to go back into this pseudo collectivity where you have lords and kings and rulers, right? And then after the mercantilistic system, then you start this age of enlightenment comes back again, and you go to more individualistic, right? I'm kind of running through history now. But the 15th century, with all that upheaval, with all those European civil wars, with the Ottomans taking over a large swath of the southern part of Europe and then getting defeated by the end of the 15th century. So now you've got shipbuilding and all that starting up, and trade starts up, and that's how the mercantilistic system eventually gets started. So now you're coming out of that, and you get, let's say, to the United States and our revolution, and now we're going back to the individual. And that experiment still going on. Fast forward to today. And we have technology now making that more rapid, and that's what I'm going to talk about now. So technology, we had the tech bubble in the 90s, and then big companies started to rise up, right? And we all are on the internet. It's individualistic freedom. And then we get all the way to the 2020 election, and now these tech giants are so big that they think that they can censor anybody, and they own everybody's assets online. They can sell them to big companies that sell you, and they can censor you, and they can tell you what you can and cannot say, and all that stuff. And so that gets back to more of this collective. And they didn't like the results of the 2016 election, so they did everything they could to reverse that and put back a more collective socialistic lifestyle. I know I ran through the history very quickly. But guess what? About 13 years ago, blockchain came along, and we're now back to individualism again. And that's because Bitcoin and all these other coins are not subject to the tech giants. They are highly individualistic. Matter of fact, they even will supplant the way governments are. Think about back in the 15th century when you started to see kingdoms being gotten rid of, more or less, or the role of the king being diminished. And now you have parliaments and voting. Well, this is going to cause local government to be more powerful now. It's going to be like the Articles of Confederation when we first started the country, except now we have more efficient ways of doing that, as opposed to the non-technological. You think back when we had the Articles of Confederation, when we won our independence from Great Britain. You didn't have much roads, no canals, not much book printing. All pamphlets and everything like that were handed out in the large cities, and eventually they trickle out to the countryside. The mail was even just now getting organized. And that was done by horseback and carriages or whatever, So you didn't even have much manufacturing at that point. So now you've got the blockchain, which is a much more advanced version of this. And so right now we're in that pushback period. It's gonna be a lot of pushback. A lot of people are not going to want this. Are you telling me that you're going to supplant my government and the people and local people are going to make laws now and taxes are going to be limited and individuals are going to be in charge of their own affairs and they're going to have to make their own money? Oh, that's scary. Not if you know how to do it. And that's the point of some of the videos I'm making and some of the videos you're going to see online from other people. So anyway, I just wanted to make a video of this today to illustrate that this is coming. There's going to be pushback. You're not going to think it's going to succeed, but it will succeed. Just like the Republic did. Just like the Revolution did. Ours, the American Revolution. This is far more likely to happen than the success of our American Revolution. And notice that the American Revolution did succeed. All right? So I just want to tell you that it's not going to seem like it maybe for now or for the next few years, but eventually that will happen. And you will see a different political following. You will not see the civil war of two political parties who basically hold all the cards and all the money. It's going to change. They're going to be the ones that are going to be asking for our money, not giving us their money. All right. So that's all I have for today. This is Scott Montgomery of the Small Town Mercer. I'll be at a conference for a couple of days, so I probably won't have a video out until the weekend. So thank you, and we'll see you soon. Have a good one.